Okay, so basically the slideshow, the focus of the slideshow is in terms of plants in habitat. So it's not taxonomical. There will be pictures and things, but that's not the focus. The main focus is I want to know where these plants grow. So I'll be looking at iNaturalist, which is kind of a citizen-based database of occurrences. And I'm also talking about GBIF, which wasn't mentioned earlier. And that's also a database of locations, but it tends to be a little more oriented towards research and science papers, but there's a lot of really good information there. And as well, iNaturalist does feed into GBIF. GBIF takes the better records from iNaturalist. And then I'm going to be looking at Google Earth, and it's kind of what I like about Google Earth. It's more interactive, it's more customizable. I can import things, I can add trips, I can do all that sort of stuff and combine it with the habitat information for my own purposes. First of all, I was just going to start out with a very brief history in terms of information and data and how we got there. It's from my perspective, or anybody who's been around growing these for 60 years, like Dave. I don't know about the rest of you. I just know Dave and I have been, well, for the last 40 years, we've been sharing cacti. So myself, when I first grew up, when I was young, I didn't have a TV until I was 10. So I didn't see Western shows and look at cacti, but I did have reading material. And this was sort of my first exposure to cacti in the desert. And it was all Opuntias and saguaros. That was kind of my impression of that's what cacti were. Now, my first encounter with a real cactus actually was in Woolworths. I don't know if you remember them. They were around 40 years ago. So I bought, I guess it was about 60 years ago, that I bought a cactus for 10 cents. And I still have the clone. As I said, I just keep chopping the top off and growing it, because otherwise, after 60 years, I wouldn't be able to keep the thing. Now, when I was 17, in the summer of my 17th year, my family went down to Mexico. And that was the first time I'd seen real cacti besides like the Woolworth cactus. And like that particular one there is Myrtlecactus geometrizans, which I didn't know that at the time. But this is where I really sort of found a love of cacti. Now, all the stuff I'm talking about works for succulents, but my focus is on the cacti. And actually, when I was there, this was 50 years ago with my parents. And my dad was a professor of horticulture, so the two of us were really into plants, much to the chagrin of my mom, because she didn't understand why we wanted to just take pictures of cacti. But we picked seeds, and about 30 years ago, when my daughter was born, I planted the seeds 20 years later, and I ended up with a plant. So that summer, when I was 17, it sounds like a song, at this point, my only experience with cacti now had been in the desert. I didn't know, Guelph didn't have libraries, information and stuff like that, but I started going to the university, and that's when I started to discover there were real books that people had written on cacti. And these are some of the earlier ones that, that I found in the library, very well-known ones, still referenced. But as well, there was these ones here. Dave probably would remember these guys, Edgar and Brian Lamb. And they started doing more of the photographic type, and they had culture and things. I actually, at that time, ended up going to England and going to their greenhouse. So seeing all those different kinds of cacti was quite interesting. But in one of their books at the back, they talked about organizations. And one of the organizations that they talked about was the Toronto Cactus and Succulent Club. And so I called them up and I went to a meeting, and this was 40 years ago. So I'm sure you all recognize Dave. He's I guess, the rebel in the back without the suit. Everybody else has got a jacket on. That's me to the right. So Dave was sort of my first experience with an expert cactus person with lots of plants. I don't know how many of you know Betty. That's Dave's wife. She used to come out to the meetings, and back when they had the greenhouse near Brampton, we used to go there and visit all the time. But this is when I started to find out there were people besides me that existed in Canada, because I thought the only people who grew cacti didn't live in a place like Canada. And of course, all my friends thought I was the only weird one around. But since that time, on the internet, I'm not going to get into it, you can find anything. Like this is just Echinocereus ficci. And the only place I saw this originally was one of those books. There's a picture of it. But now you can get all this stuff just by clicking. But the problem is there's too much information. And when you want to find location, and this is what Vlad was talking about earlier, like in Baja, when I was down in Baja and I wanted to find out more about where the ferrocacti were, I have the John Pilbeam book, and you go in and you can see, well, it exists someplace up here. Or you can go to herbarium specimens, and even if they're online, it's kind of plant by plant. So I found it quite limiting and time consuming. And nowadays, there's so much information. If you just want to, even if you want to put in the footwork, you can see there's 6 million references to cacti and 30,000 references just to Echinocereus ficci. So to find the data and the information, even though some of it's fun, it can be quite painful. So this is where it comes to finding place with data. So basically you have the plant, you have the, excuse me, the location. This plant's actually a picture I took when I was in San Luis Potosi. And that information is updated by just normal people like us into iNaturalist. And in some places, it goes to other places like Herbaria and things like that. And from both of those, you can export data. We're going to look at the iNaturalist data. And then both of those will import into GBIF. Again, for iNaturalist, it's actually the research grade stuff. iNaturalist has what they call cultivated plants. They have everything in there. So GBIF is a subset, and it's used for serious scientific research. And from GBIF, you can also get occurrences, and those can also be fed into Google Earth. You can feed anything into Google Earth as long as it's got the right format that you need. And you get to pick the fields and the data that you put into it. I'm only going to look at the iNaturalist one because I'm interested in not just research grade, but everywhere anybody has found a plant that they think might be Blasfeldia. It just gives me a little more information. I can choose to exclude that at a future date, but I tend to work with the iNaturalist stuff. All right, so why both of them? Well, the GBIF stuff, it has the iNaturalist thing, but it has a lot of other data sets. So it's in effect, it's a superset, and it's for scientific research purposes. So if you want to sort of stay within the scientific realm, GBIF is a good place to go. Whereas iNaturalist has citizens updates, but it also has citizen interactions. You can create projects together, you can talk to people, you can message people. So there's a little more that, but it still has some science rigor. Like it gets to the point where a specimen will, or an observation will have a status. So it can say, hey, someone took a picture, but they only know it's a cactus. Or someone took a picture, but it's been identified as a species, and enough people had said, yeah, it's the same, it's the right species, that now they can say, hey, you could use this for research because the world agrees that that's what this plant is. And as I said earlier, I like to see everything, not just the research grade stuff. So that's why I like looking at both of them. My experience is mainly with iNaturalist output. All right, so with Google Earth, one of the things I really like about Google Earth, and you can see similar type information in either GBIF or iNaturalist. It's just in Google Earth, you have more control. So one of the things I'd like to get down to Bolivia, and looking at a map like this, which is all the references, about 4,000 of them, I can sort of go, well, this central ridge, if I've only got a limited time, that's the area to focus on. That's where I'll have my best chance. Now, I can go into individual locations and do more with it. But there's also plant information that you can associate with it. If I click on any of those dots, this information, which we'll look at later, came from iNaturalist. So I can click on it. I know what the latitude and longitude is, all the generic information about what it is. And also there are URLs that I can click on to bounce back to iNaturalist. So this is sort of my goal, is to start with iNaturalist, GBIF, and then end up in Google Earth. So what is GBIF? Well, Global Biodiversity Information Facility, you can all read that. And basically it's an international network. All sorts of governments are associated with this. And that's where a lot of the money comes. But it's aims to be an open source, which basically means it's not just for institutes and governments to use, it's for anybody like us to just go in and see what the information is. And this is you can see here, most of the focus you can see is North and South America in terms of partners, Europe and parts of Africa, although there are pieces of information that also come from Asia. All right, so GBIF has information of where and when, because the when can be important. Some of these ones, because they're from herbaria, it might be from the 1800s. So one of the things that I like to export is date, because like when I went to Baja and I exported some herbaria information, some of the places I went to were just towns, like there was nothing left, that there's just concrete and asphalt. So the more recent stuff is your better bet to find things. As I said, it can come from museum specimens as well. It's an aggregation of data, and it's much more than the location data. And you can see, well, we'll show you what you can see, but all sorts of science information about that. Now, where they get the data from, you get it from the citizen scientists, which would be like iNaturalist. You get it from various projects that people get, and then they can feed the information into GBIF. You get eBird and iNaturalist. I don't know if you guys have heard of eBird, but this is huge if you're a birder. That's what I found out when I was down in Panama and I went on a birding trip with the birders. And these were serious birders. Like one of them wrote the book on the birds of Trinidad and Tobago. Oh, when I was down there, I made a comment to the birders that I preferred plants because every time I went back to a place, the plant was still there. And the birder turned to me and said, that's because plants are for wimps. Okay, the other place they get information is from museum specimens and bioblitzes. This is where they say, okay, on February the 4th, well, not February, but in June the 4th in Guelph, everybody report what birds they see. It's mainly oriented around birds and mammals and plants. All right, when we get into it, I am going to bounce around in GBIF just to give you some idea of what's there, but the focus will be on the data. Now, you can see trends within what they have there. And you can see, for example, here, this is plants, and they have roughly 370 million observations. Like, that's a lot of data and information that's in there. And if you go and just look at the number of species, there's roughly 500,000 species. Now, in terms of flowering plants, there's about 250,000 that exist. All right, so it records the occurrences, and it's got it by all the various information all the way back. And if you look on the right here, you can see the counts of, and you get down to Cactaceae, and there's 600,000 occurrences. Now, these are individual observations, so the same plant might be in there twice if two different people took pictures of it. But you can do this for the entire animals, plants, anything that you want to look at and sort of get some idea of what's out there. You can access basically anything. But the thing is that what's in here are what people have recorded and observed. So you may find a taxon that doesn't exist because no one's found it in the herbarium or live. All right, now this is where I want us to bounce out to. Do you guys see Chrome now?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. So all my concerns were for nothing. All right. So if we go to the get data, first thing was the trends, which I had mentioned, and I showed you a couple, but there's all sorts of things. This is if you're just curious about what's going on. Now, if you go to the data sets, this shows you all the places you get information. And you can see here that under eBird, they have almost 1 billion recordings. Sadly, I think there are more serious birders than cactus people, but that could be because cactus people can grow their own, whereas birders have to go out and look for them. You can also see that there are 325 citations. These would be in actual scientific papers. So if you want to get some idea of where this information come from, you can go through and look at these. You can also do searches that will get you that information. So this is where I was telling earlier that there's more than just a plant and where it exists. There's all sorts of information. If we go to the species, and let me do a search for, so if you go here, this is under species. I did a search for a specific one, and you can see it has references and information with regards to the species. Like you can see published in Britain and Rose. This would have been one of the first books that I showed you. There's also various, this will also show you all the checklists that have been recorded that contain a reference to Echinocerius ficci. So again, if you're into sort of serious research, or you're just curious beyond knowing what a plant looks like, this is a really good place to do it. The API, all you have to know is this is basically stands for Application Programming Interface. And this would be something where you can pre-program extracts or imports of data. I haven't gotten there. Maybe at some day I will, but right now I just do it the hard way. Okay, occurrences. So this is sort of the meat of where I would want to work. Now, under status, I'm going to select present because I just want ones where the plant kind of exists. Scientific name, I'm going to do a search for Cactaceae. So now it's showing all the references, 600,000 references to Cactaceae that have something present. The coordination uncertainty, I'm just going to leave it free right now. But what that is for certain taxons in these sorts of systems, they don't want to, for example, Aerocarpus. They don't want to show people exactly where Aerocarpus can be found. So they hide it. And it can be like, they'll give you a reference, but it might be 100 kilometers away. But right now I'm just picking all of those. The other thing is the basis of the record. You can see here, it's even got like fossil specimens. If I were to export it, it would show me where they have fossil specimens, where they have preserved specimens. But I'm not actually interested in that. The location, you could get it just with coordinates. So that's an important one. But what I'm going to do is pick Bolivia, because this is kind of what got me going. So you can see that on Bolivia, there's about 8,000 results based on what I've done. Then if you want to actually download the data, you've got 3 different choices here. Now the Darwin gives you, it's an XML format, it gives you all sorts of stuff. For me, it had no use. The species list gives you information just about the species, and I'll look at these. And the simple is kind of what my original goal was to get. I'm not going to do a download because it takes time, but if you went into my profile, no, I can't get it because it's hidden behind the gallery, but it doesn't matter. It saves the downloads for 6 months or so. So I'm going to come down here. Can you see my Excel now? Yes? Nods heads.
Yes.
All right, excellent. So I'm not going to get too much into this, but you can see there are a lot of different fields, and I don't even know what some of them are. One of the things I found interesting, though, is for this Acanthocalicium rhodotrichum, which is the accepted name, they do have references to some of the other synonyms that have existed, because these things get ID'd, and if people change the taxonomy or they come up with a new name, it's not that someone's going to automatically go through and say, well, that's no longer an Echinopsis, that's now a Trichocereus, that's not Ilosteria, that's Rebudia. You know how things change. But in the end, for me, I mean, the names are important for IDs, but as long as you know what the plant is, I don't care whether you use an old name or a new name. In fact, given how long I've been looking at these, a lot of my names are old names that some people don't even recognize. Now, in terms of the data, the blue is just fields that I would be interested in. Again, you can see there's a lot of information in terms of what you can get here. The country, the state, the province, the locations, the uncertainty principle. Actually, I think that has a different meaning in physics, but in terms of where things might be. So you can see that, yeah, this is within 100 meters, but this one is more like 30 kilometers. But even with 100 meters, it gives you location of where you might be able to find these plants. Okay, let's go back. This is working out well, this bouncing back and forth. All right. All right, going back to iNaturalist now. There are 2 iNaturalist sites that exist. One is .org and one is .ca. And they are similar. They're virtually the same thing with some differences. They're based on the same website. But the .org is kind of the everything. It's the international superset. It's got everything, whereas .ca has a Canadian subset and focus. In fact, when you go into the .ca, you can see it's already selected. So everything you do is already based on Canada. So if you search on plants or animals or mice or whatever, it's all based on Canada. But you can always just click on this and it'll switch the focus back to the international ones in terms of data. But some of the descriptions that they have and the wording and what we do and what our organizations are, they have a Canadian flavor. All right, so well, you guys can read. One of the things I like is the ability to talk to people. I haven't done that yet because before you can do that, you have to have a minimum of a few observations. They want you to have actually used it before you start trying to talk to people. But there's one guy who does a lot down in Bolivia, so I'm going to try and contact before we go down there. It's sort of the international part, and you can see this gives it to me some authority to it when you see these things. In Canada, it's these various organizations. NatureServe, which I didn't know, is a Canadian conservation organization. Give me a second here. All right. So there's different kinds of people in iNaturalist. There's the observer, the identifier, and they may be the same or different. And in fact, there may be one observer and 10 different identifiers. And people can agree or disagree. So someone says it's a cactus. Someone comes along and says, oh, it's this species. Someone comes along and says, no, it's this species. And if 20 people come along and say, no, it's the second species, then that will become the accepted name. There's a curator, and these are just people who go through and try and deal with any issues or keeping the information up to date. And there's project curators, and we'll talk about projects later on. All right, copyright, because a lot of these images are really nice and you want to use them. In general, they belong to whoever uploads them, but there is a default copyright with iNaturalist. I don't know if you've heard of this, but you may have heard it if you went into like Wikimedia, and it's basically a global copyright where you can say, these are the rights that I give to people. But within iNaturalist, they can change it. So in general, in iNaturalist, you can do whatever you want with the picture. You have to give accreditation, and you can't use it for commercial purposes. But the user can say, I don't want anybody taking this picture. So on the observation page, you can see that it'll let you know what you can do with these images. All right. So an observation or an occurrence, because I find they use both terms, is basically you've seen a plant somewhere at a certain time. I use the term plant, but it could be anything. Nests, tracks, dead things. I wonder if I could use that for my collection. But because you actually can track cultivated plants. Although interestingly, when I first saw it, it had the label of captive. And I thought, well, I don't know if I call my plants captive, but I guess that's true. And then I found out that they're used both terms, captive and cultivated. So the captive probably only refers to animals. And it can be the same organism on different dates. So you can take a picture of a flower and then the open flower and then the seed of the same plant, or two different people might end up taking the same picture. You can have photo sounds, but right now there is no video that's allowed. All right, in terms of the data quality, there's many different rules, and I'm not going to go through them all. I don't actually remember them all. But basically, you start out with verifiable, and that's basically you've got a date, you've got a reference point, you've got some sort of media, and it's not a captive or cultivated organism. And when these first get entered, a needs ID gets put into it. So in other words, to be verifiable, doesn't have to have the name yet. And then when you go into iNaturalist, people will just go and say, I want to look at all the cacti in Bolivia that haven't been identified yet. And I'm going to try and see what I can identify. And then the research grade, you can see it's 2/3 of the identifiers agreed. So it's a bit of a democracy. Now, unfortunately, like we see in Canada at the present time, if the identifiers happen to be a vocal minority, they'll still win. All right. So the Geo Privacy can be their user set. This is where I said they could hide the location, or there's automatic taxon. So if I were to add, I've got from Mexico, I've got Areocarpus and Pellicephora. If I were to add those, they would automatically obscure the location, even if I put the location in there. And the values can be like an open just means, hey, anybody can do it, or it can be obscured, or it can be private when someone says they don't want you to look at it. Now, I download these things, but in general, I go for not obscured because I don't want to look somewhere and then find out it's 100 kilometers away. Now, if I was going for a very particular plant I was trying to find, I might go, well, I would like to get within 30 kilometers of it and then just drive around and see what habitats I might think might work. This is just all the sort of information that you can put in. Where am I? All right, one of the things they have is they have computer vision, and what they're creating an AI to help in identifying the plants. And it's just based on system algorithms. I don't use it. I don't really know much about it. But one of the things it does base it on is see nearby. So if there's a cactus that someone takes a picture of, and right beside it, there's 20 other ones, they'll say, hey, here's a bunch of other ones that are nearby. Could it be the same one? Now, the same nearby, though, is within 100 kilometers. So it doesn't really help to me. And this is the one that says plus or minus 45 days within a year. So it's seasonal. So if someone took a picture of the plant in June and someone took the picture of it in September, it doesn't show up. So a lot of the forums, the plant people are complaining about it, right? Because you're going to take pictures of the same plant over time. There are various lists. One of them is the dynamic life list. And I know this is important to birders because they see their first bird and then they track every single bird they had. Like when I was with the birders down in Panama, they had their notebooks and checklists, and they were checking off every single one that they had. They have project lists, and that's for the projects where you can see what plants are in there. And there's also checklists. Now, checklists can be based on location or county or anything else like that. All right, projects. They're basically, this is where a person is going to have to say, I want to create a project. And they can use any observations that exist and just create a project to say, hey, I want to look at the cacti of Bolivia. There's also guides. Now, these guides, they're apparently they're supporting it in terms of keeping it active, but they're not developing it anymore. I found it quite handy. All right. So why Google Earth instead of the other two? And basically, a lot of it is the flexible customization. You can create and import various kinds of icons. And you can also combine it with the iNaturalist or the GBIF stuff. I use it to create personal trips. So now I'll be able to put personal trips, if I go to Bolivia, personal trip info with the cacti info all in one place. And the waypoints could be the plant ones, or you could add your own, like hotels and things like that. You can also add routes, which is something that I really quite like. And again, you have, just like with anywhere in maps, you can look at things either a satellite view or a street view where you can get right down into it if Google has actually gone through and done the street surveys. So just so you know, there's a couple Google import files, and that's KMZ, which is kind of the main one. And this is just where the default is. So if anybody's ever looking for it. Now you can have a KMZ file for Ecuador, a KMZ file for Bolivia, a KMZ file for whatever, and then bring them all together. It's just like combining any files. And KML is just a specific Google import file. And the reason I'm bringing these up, you might see these files referenced. I think iNaturalist used to have a KML export, which would have been handy, but they don't anymore. The files we're working with, if you're not familiar with them, are CSVs, which are comma separated value. Now they're just everywhere, and you can open them up, but they're just filled with commas unless you have a specific application like Excel to actually edit it. But if you export your data from iNaturalist and then export that directly to Google without editing, you will still get information. It just won't be able to customize it. It's whatever they give you is how that data is going to show up. All right, so just a very quick thing on locations. And I don't know all the technical stuff on this, but we're all used to the 15 degrees north and 20 degrees south. But there are decimal degrees and degrees, minutes, seconds, which I never used until I started using Google Maps. And basically the latitude based on the equator is between plus 90 and minus 90. And the longitude based on the prime meridian is between 180 and minus 180. So if the E and the W are missing, or the north and the south, then they use a plus or minus. So this is just very quickly. You can see the decimal. So we might have known this one as 32 north. But a lot of times you'll see this. Now for Google, you can import it either way and it'll work. You can even import it with south and north and it'll still work. All right, so these are the fields that we're going to get from iNaturalist. We're going to have the ID, when it was observed, quality. These are all just descriptions, giving you some idea of how many people like the name, information about where it is, and then also some URLs so that you can click back to iNaturalist to actually see what iNaturalist has, so you can get more information than what's on this file here. Okay. Is everybody still with me? I can't hear you, but I can see some faces. And
no, people are listening.
I don't see anybody sleeping, so.
No.
All right, so whoops. What I'm going to do now, this is the end of the sort of the PowerPoint. So I'm going to go to iNaturalist, and then I'm going to go to Google Earth. Oops. Takes a second to come up. So I've already logged on, so that's why it's coming up to where I am. So again, like we did with GBIF, I'll look at some of the other things first, and then at the end I'll go to the observations and exporting them. So if you go to the community, this is where you can see the people, and in this case they have, like, I'm sure a lot of people care about being on the leaderboard. It's like a competition. How many plants can you see? But you can see some of these people have 6,000 observations. So they're making like 15 or 20 observations a day and uploading them. So there's a lot of people take this quite seriously. Now for me, I would be interested in something like this, not so much in terms of competition, but a place where I can keep a record of all the different plants that I've seen without having to create my own system and my own mechanism to do it. So there's their people. You'll look at some guides. Now you can create a guide, but before you do that, you've got to be signed in. Let's go to North America, Canada. Let's go to Ontario. You can see there's 25 guides. Let's look for Cacti. No, we won't go to there. There aren't any Cacti guides for Canada. And you can see someone's created a guide for Killbear. Now, this is really handy if you want to go to Killbear, because then when you're looking around, you don't have to do searches or anything like that. You can just come in here and say, hey, do I see it? Now, someone has to have created this. It's basically a guidebook, but the person didn't have to create the pictures or the book or anything. All they did was say, hey, this one's in Killbear, this one's in Killbear, and just add them to the guide. So I really like this, and you know, it's a bit sad that they're not going to continue to develop it. But all right, let's go back up and let's search for Cactaceae. So I'm under Cactaceae, and I come down to guides, and I should have done my search here. There's not a lot of cacti guides that do exist. There's one from Guanajuato, which is a place down in Mexico. But again, if you're in that area, this is pretty handy because you can just scroll through and see what you can see in terms of your plant. So I quite like them. The other thing is projects, which I had mentioned. And I'll do a search on Bolivia. So this is someone who's doing a project down in Bolivia. If I just typed in Cactaceae, a whole bunch of other ones would show up. So this one is basically where someone's trying to bring together all the observations for Bolivia. Now, if you export, you're going to get that full set, or if you do a selection. This just brings it together. It also brings people together who are interested. This guy here, where is he? Martin. He's the guy who runs it, and he's got almost 2,000 observations and 200 species. So if I went to Bolivia, he'd be someone who I'd want to talk to. It also has most observed species, which I found kind of interesting. You can see this Coreo cactus is the most observed one that's down there. So you get images. This is the information you'll see elsewhere, but you can see the all the different images that you can get. I also found it interesting that most of the observations are in La Paz, like in the actual town. So I'm not sure if that's because there's more people there or there's more plants there. You don't know exactly why there's more in the observed species one. Now, this was all under observations. If you click on species, it's going to list all the species that have been identified. Now, they may be wrongly identified or they may be old names identified, but if you wanted to know what are the species of cacti that exist in Bolivia, this will give you a very good set. And it'll also give you some idea of occurrence, because you can see you would expect a lot of Coreocactus, and then I think it was Cumulopuntia, there was only like one observation down there. All right, let's go to, let's see. I'm going to go, oh, I can't get to, can I, oh, there we go. I want to go to me. All right, so this is me, and this is where you can see lists if you wanted to see your dynamic list. You can also create lists, but I'm not, I haven't done enough with this to actually create them. You can also upload if you have your, this is where you go to your data. I haven't done it. I'm sure there's specific formats and sets of information. Let's see, identify. Oh, this is going to come up with every single one. So these are all of them, but I'm going to do the Cactus family. So this is basically showing you all the ones that have been uploaded for cacti. But you can see some of them, like this one here, it's only called Cactus. And this one's only called Cactus. No one's actually put a name to it. These ones have genera to it. So this is where someone, if they felt inclined or they could recognize it or they go to the location, that they could say, well, given the location, given where it is, this is what I think this could be. Let me close that down. All right, let's do some exploring. How much time, Vlad? How much time do I have here?
I don't know, half an hour probably.
It'll be tight, but if not, I could always continue at the Baja one. But yeah, so we'll just do some quick exploration then. And what I'm going to do is look for the Cactaceae in Canada. I won't do any filtering or anything like that. Oh, one of the things you got to remember to do is when you type it in, you have to actually go down and select it. So you can see that there's quite a few observations, 8 different species. Although it's questionable, I clicked on this Opuntia Simochila, which I didn't recognize as Canadian, and it shows as being in downtown Toronto. So somehow I don't think that's a wild cactus. But if you click on Escobaria and you go to the map, you can see all the different locations in Canada where these ones. So if you're traveling west and you want to see these, this will give you some idea of where to go. And of course, you'd be able to go right down to the, like get down to a road level to try and plan your trip. Now I'm going to do Bolivia because basically that's, that was my focus of where I was trying to go. And Bolivia. All right, so you can see that in Bolivia, there's about 4,500 observations, about 200 species. This is where I tell people that I told my son I have good news and bad news if he goes with me to Bolivia. And the good news is I know exactly where to find 4,500 different cacti. And the bad news is I know exactly where to find 4,500 different cacti. So be prepared. But it gives you an idea again of where they're concentrated, right? Like they're sort of down along this rim here. This is sort of a salt flats, and there's some island in the middle of it where you get a lot of cacti, but nothing much around the coast and not a lot in sort of more into the Amazon, but that may be not as many people are in the Amazon looking for epiphytic type cacti. Again, 189 different species. Those are the ones that have been observed. All right, we'll go into the download then. All right, I've already searched for that. Now I go into filters. I've already done the Explorer, find all the cacti in Bolivia. And I don't want captive plants. I only want basically wild ones, and the verifiable or the research grade ones. And this is basically sort of the first filter range, but excuse me. You can also go into, once you've gotten to this part, the download button is in the filters screen. It took me a while to find it. It's buried down here in this corner. And then you click on the download button. And this is where, and now I'm not going to do it because it takes a long time for some of these downloads to work. But this is where you can sort of do more advanced selection in terms of what you want. And you can also say, what information do I want? And cut down on the columns or add to the columns. Like, for example, if you want family name and things like that. And then you come down to create an export. And as you can see, I've already done a couple downloads. The export's limited to 200,000 records, so you couldn't download, as I tried once, every record for all the Cactaceae. All right, so basically, we're done with GBIF, we're done with iNaturalist, we're going to go into Google Earth, I hope. All right, can you see Google Earth?
Yes.
Head's going up and down. All right, so now within Google Earth, the place to start, now I've already been importing and done some stuff, but normally you would just have my places and a couple sort of placeholders. But to get your information in, you go to File, Import, and then you would pick one. Now this is a CSV file. So in this case, you just say, yeah, sure, go ahead. I'll take all this stuff. And it'll pick up the latitude field. These are the names that are within my file. So I could have had John and Mary, and it would have picked them up. So this is where you tell it what locations you want. And even if it's a custom file, this is how Google knows where to pick it up. Now, in general, I've never had to change the field types. It's only if there's a bit of confusion. I'm not going to do that, actually. I'm going to go back and do something else. File, import. Next, and finish. Oops, sorry. Import all. All right, this is what I was looking for. Now, when you say that you want them all, it talks about a templates. Now you can save templates, and if you save them, you can just go with them. But this is where you can do things like you can set various colors. You can tell it what icon you want it to use. You can even import and use your own icon. You can see it sets from field. So you can create a cactus icon and stick it in there. So this is where you can sort of import. Now I'm not going to do the import because I've already done it. So if you come over here and you see this top line here, iNaturalist, Bolivia, that's the one that I just showed you that I was clicking on. Now, when you're here, you see my places, and my places is basically everything. Temporary places is when you do imports, that's where it first puts it. And then you get to decide whether or not you want to move it up here to be saved. So if you come up here and you hit save, you can see save my places just says, hey, save what I'm working on, or I can save it someplace else, wherever you want. And it saves it as a KMZ file. So you can mix and match. You can create, in my case, I've got a Baja one, I've got an Ecuador one, I've got iNaturalist, GBIF, so I can import and bring them in. In my case, for example, this CNET Echinocerius, I got this one from, excuse me, the Arizona Herbarium is where I found all these ones. Now, in this case, I imported the names as well, and it was just for Echinocerius, so there's a lot of data there. This other one, the Baja Flora, whoops, I gotta turn that off. Unfortunately, some of these take a while to display, so just shouldn't take too long. All right, so the Baja Flora is, I got this one from the San Diego Herbarium. And this is one I used. Unfortunately, I was there with my partner. Not unfortunately, I was there with my partner. But because I was there with my partner, fortunately, I couldn't spend as much time sort of looking in the desert. But this sort of stuff is fairly useful. I can close that one down. This is the non-cacti. I don't want to see all the non-cacti. I want to find. Oh, there it is. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the bujum tree, but you can see Fucarius columnaris. And also I've got something clicked I shouldn't have clicked, but I'm not going to worry about that because it'll take too much time to click and unclick. Oh, that's what I want to do. Get rid of those. All right, so this is just Fucaria columnaris. And you can see in Baja that if you want to see it, you're going to have to go to the north, even though I kind of knew that from reading. But I was down here, so I knew that on this trip, this would be about a day and a half of driving. I wouldn't get to see it. So again, this just shows I brought in stuff from Herbaria, I brought in stuff from iNaturalist, I brought in some of my own stuff, and I can combine it all together. All right. Okay, the other thing down here is you can see layers. The ones that you want, that I like to use, are the borders. This just shows states and the roads for driving. I don't use the other one. The other one that's important to use is terrain. If you look down here in the bottom right, whoops, you can see how it's got the latitude and the longitude and the elevation and the eye altitude, which basically says you're this far above the ground when you're looking down. But if the terrain is unclicked, this 2,000 meters thing gets set to 0. Drove me nuts the first time because I knew I'd seen it once, and then I turned off terrain and my elevation disappeared. So it took me a while to figure that out. All right. So already up here in the folders, you can see it's selecting and unselecting is basically just like anywhere else. And you can rename them. You can also set properties. So again, you can set styles and colors and all sorts of information about it. All right, let's go up to iNaturalist. All right, so this is what we just exported from iNaturalist. And basically you can see there's for every exported record, there's an occurrence. If you wanted it separated by genus or location or something like that, you'd have to create a separate file for every single one of them. I haven't figured out how to program the import. So it says, well, for this genus, I want it to be put into its own folder. I've done that in the past, but I've done it manually. You can also create new folders in here. And I've done that by, you know, like some of these, this Cactaceae Tim one is just a folder I created to dump things into it. All right, let's go back up to iNaturalist and let's just go to this first one here. I could have picked anyone, but this shows you the data for this genus. Now it shows you the location. Again, it's close to La Paz. All the information we talked about. But what I found interesting is you could come into click on the URL and it'll show you the picture as well. So you get the location and you get the picture showing up. And the reason that works is because when I exported it, I did export the image URL.
Tim, I just have a small question. I
Sure.
just noticed that you have Google Earth Pro. Is that
Yes.
the version which you have to pay for?
Google Earth Pro is free now.
Oh, free? Okay.
Yeah. They used to charge extra, but now it's just free.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. All right. So you can right click and that'll show the properties. So that's different from the data. The properties just tells you information about you know, the styles, the colors. I can change the icon to something else if I want. So that's what the properties is, which is different from the data that we were looking at. Now, if you double click on it, it'll take you down to the actual location. So I'll get rid of this. And you can see this is where it is. This would also give you a sense if you're looking for things. You go, well, it's a bit of a hike, but it doesn't look like I have to go through anybody's backyards or across anybody's private property. So that's sort of the information. So now you've got the picture, you've got the data, and you've got the location for all of the cactaceae in Bolivia. Now I'm going to go down. Here you can notice the different icons. That's because as I'm going through, out of those 4,000, I'm going to pick and select ones that I actually want to see. So if something's 2 kilometers up a mountain, I'm probably not going to go to it if there's one that's down by a road. So I'm going to create routes and checkpoints and things like that. And you can see even down here, it's not very strong, but I actually created my own icon just for fun. It's a cactus icon. Let's go to this one here. So for this series, you can see the image. So remember that image. So this one would be more pleasant to get to because you can see it's by a road. And if you notice, when I was back here, there was no color when I first started out, right? But what it is when you're too far up, the symbol here for roads disappears, like for street view. It's only as you get closer that the street view symbol shows up. And then as you get really close, you get that yellow highlight that says to you, hey, you can actually click on the street view and come down and look at the plant, which I'll do in a second. And as you bring this down, you can see the blue is letting you know where you are. All right, so now I'm on the road where that iNaturalist, somebody said, hey, I took a picture in this spot, and I went into Google Earth, and if I rotate around, there's the exact same cactus. So I know that if I go and stand in this spot, I can see this cactus. Now, this cactus in particular might not be of interest, but if I'm interested in this particular series, I know that in this area, there's this one, and chances are there are other ones as well. All right, now you go up here and to the right, and you can exit the street view, and you can see how it's still kind of fuzzy. Sometimes if you can't, like I'm using a wheel to go in and out, and if that doesn't seem to work, there's an exit ground level, which will be up in the upper right corner. So let's go down to, yeah, I think I'm doing all right on time. Rebudia pygmaea. Yeah, for people who have problems with sort of motion and stuff like this could be a little painful. No, I have to click on it to have it show. So this is, again, I could right click and see it. I can click on the properties to see exactly where it is, but this gives you the general location. So again, if I go down here, and this is a little trick that I found sort of as I was trying to find out how I could find it. You can see that there's the actual location dot is gone. So I know it's up there somewhere. But if you click on properties, which shows up the icon, I don't know why that's the only time you can see it. But now this gives me a specific location where the person said it is. Now, if they didn't use a GPS locator or something like that, you don't know. But you do know that someplace in this area, if you drove down to this spot and you hiked up there, chances are you're going to be able to find this one here. Now, what's the other one? Let me get out of Street View. All right. Now, sorry, I have to find. So what do I want to turn on? I will turn on Flora of Bolivia. All right, so you can see now there's two icons. One of them is the one that I created. That's why you see sort of a duplicate. The other one is the one that was exported. So let me just go down here, click, get rid of the one that I was working with. Now you see when I clicked on it, it went from 1 to 3. So I found it as Rebutia pygnea, but if you go to each of these circles, you can see that they've said in the same area, there's this other genus. Now what this says to me is because they all have the same location, a Lobivia, Rebutia, chances are that someone has just used a generic one, that they took lots of pictures and then just assigned the same location to all of them. But as I said, chances are if you go there and you're willing to walk around, especially for the tall ones, maybe not for the Lobivia, you would be able to find it. But as
all three of those plants look totally different though. So if the pictures are available, it would be easy to see which was which. Eh?
Yeah, and that's the nice thing is that if you click on any one of these, now you can get sort of a web access to this as well. Whoa, I'm going dizzy. But if you click on these, you can see the plant, right? That's the actual image. But also if you go back and instead I click on the higher level URL, it's going to come up here. And if there happens to be more than one, you can kind of bounce around more than one picture, or you can back out and do explore. So you can bounce back and forth between iNaturalist and Google if you want to see the pictures. So the pictures that I'm showing you aren't in Google Earth. It's just the URL that's in Google Earth. But this thing I found useful. It's not just like I'm talking about, you know, wanting to go to Bolivia, but I found this quite interesting, even for places I wasn't. I went to Peru. Well, I didn't go to Peru for the cacti, but virtually I went and I just went and looked at all the different cacti, and I could see the habitat. I could see where they were growing. I could see pictures. I could see what species existed. So I found it quite a handy exploration. All right, let's see what I got here. I've just got a few more that I wanted to show. Let's go this one. This will be fairly quick. So for example, this one you can see you're in a town. So that would give you some idea of, and you can actually go into the town. I won't do that to look at it. If you clicked on this one, it's the same species. You can see this one isn't in a town, and it's, where's the icon? Oh, I got to turn it on. But you can still get to it, but unfortunately it's on the other side of agricultural fields. So you might have to hike up an arroyo or whatever. You also have to worry about, you're in Bolivia. It's not like in Canada. And if you're found wandering up a stream through someone's fields, you might get a different reaction that you would get up here. I mean, these countries are safe, but they will share with you willingly, but they don't like it if you just kind of show up, start wandering around. Although when I had my farm, I would have questioned someone who I found wandering around on my property as well. All right. I think I'll pass that just to. All right, so I'm going to switch now. So this is giving you a good idea of how to go into iNaturalist, how to get the data, how to export it, how to import it, and all the things that you can do to bounce around it. But very quickly, one of the things I'm going to show you is connecting it with trips. So when I went to Ecuador, I got all my trip information and I imported, or not imported it, I created icons and things here. So let's get rid of that one. So for example, I have all the cities I want to go to. Here, I'll just get rid of roads and borders and labels. So this just, when I was doing my research, I went, these are the places I want to go. And then when I went to the roads, I could say, hey, here's how I want to do it. And in fact, I created routes that said, hey, here's where I'm going to drive in order to see those various places. Now, unfortunately, the first time we went down, a month before, there was an earthquake. That big, I don't know if you remember the big earthquake here where a lot of people died. One of the villages was wiped out. Bridges collapsed. So that part of the trip we didn't actually do. In fact, Sue and I were questioning whether we should go down because somehow it seemed like we just had an earthquake, all these people died, and we're going to show up and take pictures of things. But then I saw a newscast of the president of Ecuador, and he was basically begging all the tourists to come down, to bring your money. Like basically that's what he wanted. But so you can see you've got all these various routes, and to do a route, all you have to do is if you right click on this, you can see a direction from here. And then you can click on another one and it's a direction to here. And it's going to show you a route. Now this is a temporary route, but it shows this is how you get from A to B. And then if you come down here in this left and you click on this, it will actually save it as a route. Now it has a funny name to it, but you can change the name. Now to do different routes, if you want to go a specific one, you might have to say, create a route from Puerto Lopez to Manta and then Manta to San Clemente. But this gives you a lot of power. Let me just get rid of, where'd my X go? So the other thing I did when I was doing things, I went, well, I want to know where all the parks are that I want to try and get to, that I read about. Or I want to know where all the markets are that I want to go and see. Where are the hotels that I'm interested in? And doing all this, it gives me all the information that I want, and I can turn it on and off. So this I found very useful as a trip tool for getting all the cacti and the plants. Now what I want to do, of course, is to go back and combine all my trip type information with the plant information. I have never used it online, but figure out how I can take that with me either on a tablet or something like that with my GPS, because you can also upload information to a GPS. So I wanted to combine those so that when I go down, because I've traveled before and I've gone, I know there are cacti in this valley, but you have to just drive up and down roads sometimes to find them. And if you're looking for all the serious type ones, they're easy to find if you know the general area. But if you're looking, like one of the locations is for Blasfeldia, there's no way I would drive through Bolivia and be there for a month and find a Blasfeldia. But at least now I know an approximate area where they might be. But that's basically it. I'm done.